Hey, this is going to be the last of my chapter 6 videos and likely the shortest one. After this video, you guys should practice, and then practice some more. So this video, we are going to name covalent compounds, naming covalent compounds. So first thing to remember is covalent compounds are nonmetals bound to nonmetals. So anything in that top right-hand side of the periodic table will be included in nonmetal and nonmetal. Because covalent bonding does not involve charges, this means that there's a vast variety of ways that these atoms can come together to form molecules. So for example, with sodium and chlorine, there was only one way for those two to come together to form a neutral ionic compound. One sodium, one chlorine, that's it. We couldn't have two sodiums and one chlorine because that would throw off that charges, the balance of charges. So for ionic bonding, we already knew how many of each element we had because of their charges. For covalent, it's not so easy. So for covalent, I could have two carbons and one oxygen. I could have two carbons and two oxygens. I could have one carbon and two oxygens. So I could have any variety of atoms come together in almost any variety of numbers. So there's going to be a little bit more to naming these compounds. So what we see here is our rules for naming covalent. The green box and the blue box should be familiar. So the green box, we're just going to write the name of the first element. We don't touch that. We don't change it. The blue box, we're going to write the base name of the second element plus IDE. So that should feel very familiar from ionic. So oxide, fluoride, chloride, bromide. So very familiar with those already. The new piece here is in yellow. So each of those elements is going to need a prefix. And the prefix is going to tell us how many of each element is there. So if there's one, it's going to be mono. If the subscript is 2, it's going to be di, tri, tetra, so on and so forth. So we've got to tell the viewer how many of each element is present in that compound. Okay? So let's do a couple examples. So here is our first example. Let's look at this first one. So N2O. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to write down the names of the elements. So the first element I see is nitrogen. The second element I see is oxygen, but I've got to keep the base name and add IDE, so oxide. Okay. Then I'm going to put in the prefixes based on how many of each I have. So I have 2 nitrogens. That is the prefix di. So di-nitrogen. And I have 1 oxygen. Remember that 1 is implied. I have 1 oxygen. So that's the prefix mono. So mono. So one little wrinkle here, one little exception, I guess, if you will. We don't typically say monoxide. What do we typically say? Yeah, we typically say monoxide. So if you write monoxide, Pearson might kick it back as a spelling error. We typically would just say monoxide. Same idea here. So the name of this is dinitrogen monoxide. Why don't you try to name the second one? So pause the video, give it a shot, and then I will work through it with you. All right, so nitrogen again. Oxygen again. So base name is ox plus IDE, oxide. Go back and knock out the prefixes. So I still have 2 nitrogens. So dinitrogen. And this time I have 5 oxygens. So that's penta. Move this over. So penta oxide. Okay. I do want to talk about one exception to the rule here. So that's the basics of naming covalent compounds. There are a couple exceptions to the rule, but it turns out you already know those exceptions to the rule. So I want you guys to go ahead and write the name of this compound. All right, so we've got carbon. We've got oxygen, but we're going to keep base name ox, add IDE. And systematically, what it tells me I should do is put the prefix mono for each of these, right? So mono. But do we say monocarbon, monooxide? We don't. What do we call this? We call it carbon monoxide. So that's the exception to the rule. If the first element, there's just one of them, we never start a name out with mono anything. So we would not say mononitrogen. We would not say monocarbon. We would not say sulfur. So we don't start with the word mono. So here's another example. See if you can do this one. So again, we've got carbon, we've got oxide. How many oxygens do we have? 2. And there's only 1 carbon here. So would I start with mono? So we don't say monocarbon dioxide. What do we call CO2? We simply call it carbon dioxide. So that's it for covalent naming. There's really not a whole lot to it. The most important thing is really to identify it as a covalent and then remember to use their prefixes. In the helpful handouts, I have posted a very, very good worksheet called Naming Compounds. Naming compounds will mix together covalent, ionic, transition metals, polyatomic ions. So it's mixed everything into one worksheet. I highly, highly recommend that you work your way through that worksheet. Once you get through it, you will come out much better on the other side. So I will post a blank worksheet. I will post the answer key, and that will give you a great place to go to practice this information. Good luck with Chapter 6.